Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Katie Goen, Senior Producer at AlertMedia, and I'm so excited to be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us. And I've personally been looking forward to this webinar because the team here today and myself get to reveal some incredible insights from AlertMedia's second annual State of Employee Safety Report, and we have fresh new data for 2023. So I think you're going to find this information really helpful and potentially even surprising in some cases. And so what we're going to do today is go over some of the key takeaways from that report and also give you some tips and advice for how to use the data to inform your preparedness plans, your employee communication strategies, and even use it to attract and retain talent in this highly competitive market. So I do want to point out that today's webinar will be interactive. So instead of a large, question and answer session at the end of the presentation, we're going to pause at the end of each section just to get some audience questions and some feedback. So be on the lookout for that. And we've also included a couple of polls as well. So we would love your participation in those as you see them come up. So with that said, I would love to introduce you to today's speakers. Our featured guest today is Matt Paladino, Senior Vice President of Insights at Material. So he leads quantitative and mixed method engagements to uncover solutions for Material's largest clients and agency partners. And Matt has really diverse experience that ranges from financial services and retail to food and beverage and healthcare. So that allows him to draw upon a range of practices that have proven effective regardless of industry. So we're in really great hands today. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Thanks, Katie. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'd also like to introduce you to Peter Steinfeld. Peter has been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years now. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia. So he works really closely with a wide range of organizations to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast at AlertMedia. So he has some really great conversations with leaders from organizations like Starbucks, Salesforce, agencies like FEMA and the CDC. So fun fact, Matt was actually a guest on the show just a couple of weeks ago. So if you do enjoy today's discussion, you may want to check that one out. But back to you, Peter. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
No, it's fantastic to be here. This is my favorite webinar that I do throughout the year because the information is just so insightful. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it and highly encourage everyone to download the full report to see all the details.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go over just a few of the key research topics that we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to get into, do employers and employees feel the same about workplace safety? We'll talk about how does work location impact employees' feelings about safety practices or perhaps their access to training. We will talk about if employees are receiving enough mental health support at work. And finally, how can organizations make employees feel safer and more valued? So let's go ahead and get started with a poll. So if you could please take a moment to fill out the question on your screen. There it is. We're asking which aspect of employee safety currently needs the most improvement at your organization. So would you say it's the physical safety aspect, maybe psychological safety / mental health, remote or hybrid worker safety, or maybe it's those safety communications, which seems like it's always a big one in all the webinars that we do. So let me give that just another few seconds, and then let's go ahead and share those results, please. All right, so it looks like physical safety and psychological safety are pretty neck and neck here at the top of the list. So let me go to you, Matt, first. Is that about what you were expecting to see, or is there anything surprising about that?
I think that does make sense. And speaking on behalf of the employees who we surveyed, they'd agree with you as well. It feels like a lot of them are looking for more ways to have their organizations provide them more trainings and communications around physical safety and mental health overall.
That makes a lot of sense. And Peter, do you have anything to add there?
I was going to say something very similar. I'm really glad to see this because the data show that people care about this from a psychological safety standpoint.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Peter and Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you both now so that we can talk about, why this research is important, along with some of the methodology that was used for the survey. So, Peter, do you want to start things off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Katie. I think we can all agree that employee safety is really important and should be top of mind for any organization out there, no matter the size. We've all seen studies and reports on this topic, but more often than not, the employee perspective, as Katie mentioned before, is missing from the conversation. So to help change that, we did commission a survey from the firm Material to ask employees very directly how they feel about the safety of their workplace and how they think their employers value their safety. Big difference there. So we also need this data, or sorry, what I would say is we need data that's much more inclusive demographically, because prior reports have looked at things like workforce trends specific to a particular industry or related to a specific incident, such as the pandemic. But today's workforce is just very different than it was pre-pandemic. So our goal overall was to cast a really wide net and survey a really large range of employees to get an accurate reflection of current perceptions across many different industries, many different generations, and employee groups. So from the top to the bottom of the organization. And Matt will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And then finally, we really wanted to compile data that was applicable to any organization, no matter its size, its industry, or its location. And as Katie said, we want to give you data that you can actually use to your advantage. By conducting the study annually, we've been able to draw conclusions about how employees' perceptions of workplace safety have shifted year over year, which is why it's so exciting to me to do this webinar, which is really important for identifying these trend lines as they change over time. Now, as we learn from conducting our inaugural State of Employee Safety report in 2022, it's important to address the current challenges that both employers and employees are experiencing for the most accurate, relevant insights that are out there. The current threat landscape, for example, nearly every organization has experienced the impacts of recent severe weather events or natural disasters. There's some going on today. These tornadoes are incredible. And it doesn't matter where they are located geographically. Any kind of disasters or other disruptive events are becoming more frequent, more severe, and more intense, making employee safety really more important than ever. There's things like geopolitical upheaval and tension, like the Russia-Ukraine war. That's impacted many employees' perceptions of the world, as well as the business operations for many organizations. So that's another factor contributing to employee safety right now. And then when you add the financial stress caused by global economic instability and an uncertain labor market, the result is an American workforce that is basically worried and stretched thin, and you'll see that in the data. And speaking of stress, the pressures and turmoil of the pandemic really have caused a lot of workers to experience new or just worsening mental health conditions. So you guys saw that in the poll that we showed you before, or we asked you about before. They really impact the workplace, leading to a lot more emphasis placed on improving employees' psychological safety. So just to summarize this slide, the research is really important because it can equip you with insights on how to better protect your people from current threats, as well as some context on what they need right now to feel safer on the job. Additionally, and I say this all the time, you can tug on the heartstrings of your executives with emotional, anecdotal stories about safety and security, but you can really tug on their purse strings with hard empirical evidence. And that's precisely what this report provides. So Matt, with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to discuss the methodology behind conducting the survey that really informed the current 2023 State of Employee Safety report.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, this survey was fielded in January of 2023, so it's all recent data from this year. We surveyed more than 2,000 full-time employees across the US, and this really provides a robust set of information, not only from a statistical stance, but also because it allows us to do a lot of data cuts within. So to Peter's point, we wanted to make sure this study was well represented and well diversified, both from an organizational and a personal stance. So we have a lot of data on various industries, across regions, across company sizes, job roles, job levels, demographics, you name it. We've got a lot of different cuts available to us within the data set itself, which permitted us to really do a lot of deeper dives to really understand what's going on in the various industries these days, Where are the similarities? Where are some differences? But really that representation was key to us as we were developing the survey methodology itself. But if we dive into the next slide and look at some of the big picture implications, I want to just set the stage a little bit for some of the information we're going to be hearing about today. So as was mentioned, this is the second year we've been doing this study. Last year, we saw that nearly everyone, 97% of employees, said it was important to always feel safe at work. And I can imagine that's not a surprise to anyone on this call at all. But what we want to do is set up what's different this time around and how are we going to dive in deeper to understand some of the nuance within that. So to double down on some of the points that Peter was just making, I want to start off with the left-hand stat here, which states that nearly half of our employees said that they believe the world is a more dangerous place today than it was a few years ago. And this is important because it's key to keep in mind that it's not just what happens within our office walls or at an employee's home desk that really helps inform their views on safety. There's other things that come in from the outside world that we have to take into account. So it's important just to have that context in mind as we think about what has changed for people day in, day out, and what are employees potentially expecting from their employers at this point. What we ultimately saw is that there's a lot of shortcomings from the view of employees when it comes to the safety perceptions at their organizations. You can see here in the middle stat that 3/4 say that their employees' safety efforts have not been very effective, and 71% say they don't think their employers are following through on safety promises. So there's clearly an appetite for more information and different approaches to how we think about safety in the workplace. And what we're seeing is that employee trust, engagement, and loyalty are all at stake if we don't deliver on these elements. We're going to dive into all that more in the slides that come. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg overall. And again, you can find the report and more information throughout, but excited to share with you some of the deeper information. But Katie, if it works for you, maybe we can go ahead and dive in.
Let's do it.
Excellent. So the first section we have today is really focused in on employers, employees, and how do they feel about the workplace. So really want to dive into the potential disconnect that might exist today in the workforce. If we move to the next slide, you can see here we asked two key questions to our respondents. One was, how important is something to you? And the second is, how important do you believe that is to your employer? And what we can see in these red bars is that physical safety, level of satisfaction with the work is more important to employees than they think it is to their employers. So there's a sense that I, as an employee, care more about my safety than my employer cares about my safety. I, as an employee, care more about how happy I'm at work compared to my organization does. But when we move to elements such as productivity, that's where we see the flip occur, where there's a perception that employers care more about the financials, about productivity, about what they're getting out of the employees, than they do generally care about the safety and well-being of the employee itself. And so this helps set up a dynamic for us to consider about how do we help express what we care about, how do we showcase to employees that we care, and really what are some of the metrics in place to help ensure that we're taking the right steps forward. If we move on to the next slide, this is really so important for everything because we really do see it have an impact. And to Peter's point, this is one of those proof points that helps showcase how important the elements of safety are at organizations. What we see here is that 46% of employees say their employer genuinely caring about their safety overall would make them want to stay with an organization long term. And certainly we've all heard plenty in the marketplace these days about the labor market right now. You know, some industries are scaling back, others are booming and looking to hire more folks. But I think regardless of where one industry or another sits, we can all agree that we want to retain the best talent. And ensuring that we have the proper safety mechanisms in place and make people feel secure and happy in the workplace is one of the key ways that we can help make that happen. But Peter, I'll pass it over to you now. We'd love to hear what you think about we can do about some of these data points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can use this information to your advantage, especially since it can help you foster employee loyalty and job satisfaction. That's a really big point. One way is to use the data to create and implement an effective communication strategy so your people are basically in the know about any safety updates or general safety policies, protocols, and procedures. Really use it as an opportunity to communicate to your people that employee safety is indeed your top priority. And you can back that up by involving your employees in the conversation. That's super important. solicit feedback by asking them what would make them feel safer, or if they've observed any safety issues that need to be addressed. And your communication strategy should also include identifying which employees to communicate with and when. For example, not every employee company-wide really needs to receive a message about a faulty piece of equipment that only a handful of employees use, as that could end up just causing confusion or just a lot of unnecessary questions. But every employee does need to know about a new process for reporting safety or security concerns to their manager. You can also really up-level your communication strategy by investing in a modern, easy-to-use emergency communication solution for both everyday communications and during crisis situations. And just a quick plug on us. AlertMedia system can help you reach the right people with targeted messages very quickly and efficiently. With just a few clicks of your mouse or by using your thumb on your smartphone, you can initiate notifications to small or large groups of people across multiple channels all at once, including things like text, email, voice calls, mobile app pushes, computer pop-ups, and a whole lot more. And you can even do things like solicit feedback in the form of a read confirmation or a survey style notification. And then that real-time feedback can be really helpful to understand who is and who is not receiving your messages, as well as providing you with all sorts of insight on where to focus your efforts based on the nature or the response that you receive. That dynamic nature is super helpful. And there's a lot more you can do in the system too, but that's not the point of today's session, just letting you know what's out there. Now, back to the research, what really differentiates it is that there's not a lot of hard data out there on this subject, and safety leaders must typically rely on things like injury or accident rates to justify bigger investments in safety, things like emergency communication systems. But with this information that you're getting at, this empirical data spread across thousands of employees, you can directly see how those employees' unmet needs surrounding safety could be contributing to things like turnover or lack of employee engagement, lower productivity and job satisfaction at your particular organization. And that's something that really catches an executive's ear. So Katie, back to you.
Yeah, I think this is a great time to actually pause and get some audience questions or some feedback. And remember, you don't have to just submit a question. It could be an observation or a comment, anything that you feel is relevant. So let's get started here. So Matt, can you kind of clarify, are we asking employees about safety, like environmental health and safety issues, or security, or is safety kind of a combination of all of that?
Yeah, we're really trying to understand safety from the highest level, but we are getting into some specifics, which we're going to keep diving into as well. So it can be physical safety, it can be mental health, it can be environments outside our control, like weather issues that could be taking place. So we really took a top level view to understand it with some focused areas more specifically to dive in more fully to understand what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. And a question for you, Peter, when it comes to the communication you were talking about, do you suggest that we use the same messaging across all channels or tailor messaging based on the channel that we're using?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because we oftentimes see people saying, hey, this is what I want to communicate with the broader audience. And then they say, we're going to send it out via email, we're going to put it over here, put it there, and it's the same message across all those channels. And frankly, different channels are better for displaying certain types of information or certain amounts. Like if you have a really quick emergency, you wouldn't want to send someone a text that's like 2,000 characters because they probably won't read it. It's got to be able to something they can consume in like 3 seconds or less. But email is something that you could transmit a lot more information across because it makes sense. People have time when they read email. They expect to engage for several minutes in that message. And then furthermore, you could have some web pages that have a lot more content where people can really go down rabbit holes and learn whatever they want. So very much think of the medium over which you're communicating the message and don't try to put the same message across all mediums.
Excellent. Well, great questions so far, guys. Keep them coming. And let's go ahead and move on to our next data point, Matt.
Perfect. Yes, this is a section near and dear to my heart as someone who does travel for work. But we wanted to start off by just saying, we saw some data points out there that said 78% of travel managers believe there's going to be more business trips this year in 2023 than 2022. That was from Global Business Travel Association. So we do know this is top of mind for a lot of folks these days and wanted to dive into some of the results and how employees are feeling about business travel when it relates to safety. So this slide is really looking at what are people worried about when they're traveling for work? What's top of mind for them? What are they concerned about? And on the far left-hand side here, the top element that's probably not going to be too surprising for folks is that nearly half of employees who travel for work are concerned about delays, disruptions, their flights getting canceled, potentially missing a trip back home, whatever it may be. What was interesting to us is that the second piece here was their safety. 2 in 5 of people who travel for work said they're worried about their safety when they're traveling for it. And this was higher than things like being away from their family and friends. It was higher than getting behind on other tasks at work. And I think this really strongly highlights how important safety is for folks, and that we have ways in to consider training folks and educating folks potentially when they're traveling to help them understand what's available to them and what they should know to make sure they feel safe and secure while they're on the road on our behalf. And so business travelers aren't necessarily aware of everything that's going on, exactly what's available to them. And Peter, before I dive into the data here, I was wondering if you could give us a quick summary of duty of care, just in case anyone's not as familiar with that term.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know, duty of care is really this growing moral and legal obligation of organizations to really consider and protect the safety of those people who are under their care, which could be things like visitors, customers, contractors, or employees, is what we're talking about today, and many others. Now, the breadth and depth of an organization's responsibility in this area has been growing ever since, I think it really goes back to it was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York back in March of 1911. So, gosh, that was like 110 or so years ago at this point, where a lot of people died due to safety negligence. And it's really since then expanded from the obvious, like ensuring people have safety exits and sprinkler systems within an organization's buildings, to things that are much more broad, like remote worker and to this point, traveler safety, as well as things like mental health well-being. There's just so much more today for an employer to consider. So Matt, sorry, go back to you.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Peter. Because a lot of what we're seeing from the data itself is that employees are not quite sure what's available to them today when it comes to traveling for work. And so overall, what we see on the left-hand side here is 38% of employees are required to travel, but only 44% say they feel extremely safe when doing so. So that's a pretty strong gap that we can try to address. How do we get that 44% to be 100% people feeling extremely safe? That's how ideally we'd have our employees feel when they're traveling for us. But what we're seeing and some of the causes that might lie behind this are the second and third points here. So only 41%, 41% have never been informed of potential safety risks at their destination. So they don't know what to expect when they get somewhere, especially potentially if they're traveling internationally. What's the best protocol for how to get around, where to stay? And then the far right-hand side is half folks don't know who to reach out to if they do reach any issues while they're traveling. So who's that point person? What phone numbers can they call? What emails can they reach out to? But a lot of this really stems from the idea of how do we help ensure that employees know what they can do, know that we're here to support them, and give them the tools so that they feel like they can make the best choice for themselves and feel secure when they are traveling for work itself. Peter, curious how you think about some of these stats and how they might apply into organizations overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's just overall interesting about these stats is just how big some of these numbers are, which means that employees really are concerned about this stuff. But also, I'm noticing that it probably wouldn't take a whole lot to make them feel more comfortable. So I know we're going to get more to that later. But for this specifically, if your organization does have business travelers, I would say consider conducting travel risk assessments before each trip. And it doesn't have to be very complicated. You can start with just 3 very basic questions. And this is a tip I learned from Brian Cook at Marathon Petroleum when he was a guest on the Employee Safety Podcast about a year or so ago. And those questions are very simply, who is going? Where are they going? And what are they doing? That can really help you understand the risk that's going to be associated with that trip. They're going to help you determine what potential risks your employee might experience along the way. And then you can communicate this information to the traveler to help keep them safer before and during that trip. Frankly, the traveler should absolutely know who to contact at your organization if something goes wrong, as well as just general tips for protecting themselves, because you can't do everything for them when they're out in the field. but also don't forget their company data. That's a big part that a lot of people don't think about. It's like, hey, personal physical safety, but they don't think about data. And that could be a big concern depending on where they're going in the world. Should they take a different laptop? Do they know how to use a VPN? All those things that you should consider. You should also consider proactively monitoring any kind of threats that are near your business travelers' destinations. If you don't have a team to do it or the bandwidth to do so, it can be very time consuming to do that. So a lot of organizations don't. You can actually invest in threat intelligence solutions that will serve this stuff up to you so you can get alerts when something happens and then go into action. We do at AlertMedia have a capability like that. It's a combination of really highly trained Intel experts and technology. So basically, we're scouring the world for any incident that might impact health and human safety or business continuity. And then we verify that they're actually real before we let you know about them, because there's a lot of information out there. But once we verify it, we publish that in our product for our customers to consume in a variety of ways, like seeing it on a map and in proximity to all the people and assets that you care about, or maybe just receiving real-time alerts via text or an email or something that catches your attention if you're consumed with something else. We cover a wide range of categories, everything from violence and crime to inclement weather and natural disasters, and a lot more. So just generally speaking, if it's our solution or something else, the faster you can know about something and start reacting to it, generally speaking, the better outcome you're going to have. Always good to be 2 steps ahead of something instead of 2 steps behind it. Now, just one more point on this slide. I highly suggest looking for a threat intel solution that integrates with your travel risk management solution. So you have everything you need to protect your business travelers too, in addition to all the other folks you're looking out for, in one easy to use place. This way you're not bouncing back and forth between multiple screens and methods and ways of doing things. And you can set up all sorts of automated alerts about nearby risks and faraway places that you aren't familiar with yourself that are sent directly to you, but also to the traveler's device. So it just really helps with the overall process. But in summary, the main thing to remember is that the better prepared and more informed your travelers are before they depart, the more likely they are to return home safe. So keep that in mind. Katie?
Yeah, great point there, Peter. All right, let's take a quick break for some audience questions and feedback. And Matt, we're getting quite a few questions about some demographics here. So do the findings show that older versus younger people have the most concerns about business travel, or how do the demographics impact this point?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the reasons why we're glad to have such a diverse sample set to look at. When it comes to some of the age pieces, we do see that younger generations are more concerned about safety when it comes to travel. They stated they're more concerned about safety itself, around getting behind from work, and also the impact it has on their mental health. And I think this helps highlight just that people who are newer to organizations, people who maybe haven't done this before, are a little bit extra anxious about what it might mean. And so all the more reason to help ensure that they have the tools necessary. So they're going on their first business trips, they feel like they know what they should be doing and how to get where they need to go safely.
That makes a lot of sense. And we actually have a comment here from an attendee that says, you don't realize how useful travel safety and security is until you go to a company that doesn't have a program. So I'm sure a lot of folks on this call can relate to that. So a lot of questions we're getting are applying to data points that we have later in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next data point, if that's okay with you, Matt.
So next up, we have a couple slides looking at some of the differences that exist between people working from home full-time, hybrid, or in the office, and want to really start to highlight some of the differences that we saw around how they perceive safety and what their organizations are doing on their behalf. So if we dive into the data itself, I think to level set us a little bit here, on the left-hand side, what we see is that we still have a lot of people who are working at home in some capacity. It is down a little bit this year compared to last year, looking at 42% versus 47%. But clearly more than 2 in 5 individuals are still working at home in some capacity for their jobs right now. So making sure we're balancing both the trainings for in-office employees, the folks at home, and those who are hybrid is going to continue to be really important to make sure everyone's being represented effectively. The data on the right-hand side I found to be pretty interesting. Sorry, if you don't mind going back really quickly.
Sorry.
Around who feels extremely safe while working. All good. Essentially, what was interesting here is that there's been a lot of talk these days about companies who want people to come back into the office and really trying to focus on the convenience element around, well, it's easier to work from home because you can pick up your kids from daycare or you can do laundry between meetings. But I think what this data helps highlight is the element of safety might also be needed in that conversation, knowing that people feel much more safer working from home than at the office or trying to get to an office and commuting. I think that's really important for us to keep in mind for those organizations that are trying to get employees back to the office. How do we make them feel like they're going to be as safe in the office as they can be when they're at home? But now, Katie, if you don't mind, we can go on to the next one. Perfect. Thank you. So, focusing a bit more on some of the remote workers here, we do see some differences exist between people who are working remotely and those who are working in an office. And I think the top point here is really important that people who are remote or hybrid, they don't think that their physical safety is as important to their employer as the people who are the in-office employees. So making sure we're having all employees feel cared for, like they matter when it comes to safety is really important, especially for those folks who are working at home or from remote locations. And what really drives this point home further is maybe they feel this way because they're not getting as much training or not getting the same communications that people are in the office. What we saw is that remote employees state that they're getting 13% less safety training offerings than those who are hybrid or in office. So how do we help make sure that they're getting a lot more training in place? Maybe some of it's that business travel training that we were just talking about from a moment ago to help them feel like they are being supported and that their employer cares about who they are and how safe they are at their organization. Peter, what do you think about some of these stats? How do you think companies should be reacting to it?
Yeah, I mean, this one I think is pretty straightforward, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier about duty of care. So organizations, I think, should extend their duty of care to include both hybrid and remote workers and go beyond just four walls of their physical facilities that they're responsible for. It's good for the employee and it's good for the organization because safe employees are more productive employees no matter where they are. So frankly, you can start by ensuring that all your safety initiatives and training are fully inclusive of all your people. Every worker should feel safe and protected while working. Doesn't matter where they are. Every employee out there can and should contribute to your safety culture, whether they're at home, in the field, traveling, or they're on site every day. So for remote employees, what I think is really effective is you can send them regular messaging about things like, and I bring this up first because it's often overlooked, but cyber safety, how to ensure their home IP address and company data are secure. That's a really big one. People tend to get relaxed when they leave the corporate environment. Home safety, like what to do in case of a fire or some kind of other emergency. Another good one is ergonomic risks for their home office workstations. Many people put themselves in very suboptimal work from the couch type positions for long periods of time. That's not good. It's going to make them less productive later. And also important is communicating about threats near their homes that could potentially impact their safety. And that could be anything from violence and crime to wildfires, other natural disasters, inclement weather, things like that. And then lastly, help them understand the resources or services that are actually near their homes if there is an evacuation or a power outage. Just knowing about that ahead of time can make all the difference in the world when something does happen. So the proactive approach overall is just going to help your remote employees feel more included, more protected, and that their safety is indeed important to you guys. Katie?
Great. Yeah, let's go to some feedback now. Matt, did folks indicate why they felt safer working remotely? Like, is there any understanding of if it's like not having a personal home safety plan, or is it more of a communication issue rather than like accessibility to safety info? You shed any light on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we did ask some questions understanding why they prefer working from home versus at an office. And some of it had to do with pieces of convenience. But what we did see on the safety side of the spectrum is they're less worried about getting sick if they work from home because they're not around other people. But I think one of the bigger elements is actually the commute itself. And it's that travel. It's not necessarily the time or inconvenience of traveling, but it's, I don't know what's going to happen when I'm on the subway or when I'm on the highway going to the office. And so some of those additional concerns are some of the reasons why they feel less safe when they're at an office versus when they're just home and don't have to worry about that commute.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And then I think this one's probably for you, Peter. Someone has a comment here that then leads into a question. One thing that came up in this person's last job is that an employee that was working from home had some domestic abuse going on in their household. And so this person did listening, using soft skills, things like that to really support that person. But do you have any suggestions, Peter, for communicating with remote employees to really let them know you care about them, that you wanting to know what's going on in their lives?
Yeah, it can be really difficult, especially if they're fully remote and they don't ever come to the office and you don't have time to make that physical human connection. You have to really up your game and communicate over other channels like we're doing today, where you can visually see someone on a screen and try to make connections. It's hard. Like, this is something we all were pushed into during COVID, but you have to make an effort to do so. The other thing to do is to ensure people really understand that they can go to you for help, and it will be anonymous. As much as you can make it so, or explain that you'll connect them with a professional who can maintain that legal confidentiality. So it's super important to just let people know that you're there to help. And there was a great podcast episode that we had recently that talked about this, and how the organization that looked out for this kind of thing made a real difference, not just for the person who was being abused, but for the larger organization, because the abuser would come in and attack the office.
Oh, I think we actually lost Peter there. Peter, we lost you for a second.
Nope. Am I back now?
Yes. Yeah, I think you were just saying it's really important to know that things are confidential, anonymous, and really just say we can connect you with the right person who can get you the help that you need. It's a very good point. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next data point, Matt, just in the interest of time. So it's all yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. And yeah, this is one of those points that came up at the poll at the start of this. So hopefully this section's helpful for a lot of folks on the call here, but want to dive more into the mental health component and how employees are feeling about that these days. So the first stat we have is going back to those two questions I talked about earlier on. How important is something to you versus how important do you think it is to your employer? And mental health is very much in that same realm that we saw physical health earlier, around employees think it's more important to themselves than they think it is to their employer, which I think, again, just highlights opportunities for us to really showcase to employees how this does matter to us, how it is something that we prioritize, so they start to feel that way and we start to adjust some of those perceptions that they may have. If we go into the next slide, we can look at a few more data points that highlight this a little bit more, because certainly mental health has a lot of impacts on folks and can impact their ability to do their job well, how long they want to stay at a company, whatever it may be. And so a few stats here to help support some of the ideas of what maybe we could be doing to help folks out more. So on the left-hand side here, about a third of employees believe that their employer makes an active effort to support their mental health. And I think what that highlights for me is that 2/3 do not believe that their organization's making an active effort. So clearly there's a gap here and opportunities for us to make a bigger effort to showcase how this does matter for us and how we can help them. And then I think this next two data points help highlight some tools that we can keep in mind that might help out in these situations. The middle one being really focused in on the number of employees who believe an employer provides mental health resources, which is on the lower side at 38%. And then 33% of employees feel they can have an open dialogue about their mental health in the workplace. So again, I think there's some room here to really demonstrate to employees, really start pushing these numbers so that when we ask this question next year, this time around, we can start to see some improvement and change and help showcase that organizations are caring and employees are starting to recognize the efforts being made. But Peter, what do you think about some of the mental health stats we have here?
Yeah, I would say start by making mental health a higher priority. And it seems like a lot of our attendees do recognize this is something they want to tackle, because frankly, writing off this element of safety just directly contradicts what employees say is important to them. It's what the data show. As we discussed earlier, your employees have been through a whole lot of stuff in the past few years with the pandemic, the intensifying threat landscape, economic concerns, and a whole lot more. And all these things just accretively great on the psyche. They affect people differently too. That's something to consider. Sometimes someone goes a long time, no issue, and then they snap, and other people snap earlier. So you just never know. So with that in mind, here are just a few ways that you can prioritize mental health in the workplace. First is just to make sure your employee assistance program, or EAP, is comprehensive and robust, and then be sure to communicate about it. Employees can't utilize services like these resources that you put out there if they don't know about them, and a lot of people don't. You can also try a new or different approach to leadership, such as developing and utilizing soft skills like empathy, reflective listening, or even just spending more time checking in on how your employees are doing. I also strongly suggest that you encourage employees to report any mental health concerns or issues that they've observed in the workplace. Either make this fully anonymous or just always reiterate that there will be no retaliation or punishment at all for reporting anything of concern. And then lastly, really go out there and solicit employee feedback about what programs or initiatives would make them feel more supported when it comes to mental health or psychological safety. You might be surprised by the feedback, especially since this has not generally been an area, historically speaking, that many organizations have spent a good deal of time on. Katie?
Yes, let's pause here for some feedback. And actually, we're getting more questions, Matt, about the demographics. So, were there generational differences here that you saw when it comes to mental health? And then also, what about male versus female differences as well?
Sure. Yeah, what we are seeing overall is one of the things that's interesting to me is that across generations, everyone thinks it's equally important for themselves. So I feel like there's often a lot of talk that mental health is more of a younger generation issue, but what we're seeing is it matters to everyone pretty equally across the board. Same for genders as well. One thing that we did see a little bit different, though, is that younger generations are more concerned about an incident taking place at the workplace. And so, again, this is where helping educate and help them understand what we have in place, what tools are available to individuals can really be helpful so that people know what to do should an event arise.
And Matt, I'm not sure if you have this information readily available, and no worries if you don't, but someone sort of had a question about that. It's related. Do you have the most concerning safety issue received from your feedback? Was it mass shooter? Question mark. Do you happen to know what the biggest concern was?
That's a great question. I don't have that readily available, but we can certainly take a deeper look and see what's available on that stat.
Yeah, I know this is covered in the full report, so that's available
Perfect.
for download, and
Yeah.
we'll give you all that information next. Great. And then I had a question for Peter here. Oh, Peter, what does reporting a potential mental health concern look like? Is that like a policy or a procedure, or can it look a lot of different ways for organizations? Any insights there?
Yeah, it can vary quite widely, but at the highest level, you should look at like a kind of a two-sided coin. You've got the person that has the mental health issue, and then you have people out there that are observing people with mental health issues. And you have to make sure both feel comfortable basically soliciting help or asking for help for those situations. So for the person reporting something they're seeing, you can offer anonymous tip lines, or again, focusing on that, hey, there'll be no retaliation, that message that people know that it's better to bring it to forefront and report it first. And then for people that are experiencing some kind of mental health concern, make sure that they know they can go to their manager or someone in HR to express that they need help, and then give them the resources that they need to address that issue.
Excellent. And then we just have a final comment here before we move on. One of our attendees says that their company has a mental health first aid program and employees are certified in that discipline. So I think that's a really cool addition as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, Matt,
That's fantastic.
let's move on to this next point.
Excellent. Yeah, I believe this is our last section today. And this is really diving in deeper about how we can help employees. So based on everything we've been talking about today, what are some overarching ideas and what are employees hoping to get after that'll make them feel safer when they're at work? So we asked our employees to tell us what would make them feel like their employer cared more about your safety. And it really came down to a couple of core pieces around training and communications. And so what we're seeing really is a desire for more of these from what we've heard from the employees themselves. At the top stat, you can see here, 35% say they'd feel better about it if there was improved communications about safety plans and policies. Second one down is really about transparency. So really, how do we help make sure that we are not only giving people the resources available so they know what to do if something arises, but also communicate to them when something does happen so they know, one, that it occurred, two, feel more trust that we're being transparent about what happened, but three, also let them know how we handled it and how we would handle it in the future so they feel reassurance that they're going to be taken care of should that same kind of incident happen down the road again. If we move to the next slide here, what we're looking at is really just an understanding of things that we can do more fully to help them feel safer overall. And I think the left stat here is really a key one for us to keep in mind and goes back to the disconnect we were talking about at the start of this presentation, that 84% of employees think their employers can do more to prepare them for emergencies at work. So to help showcase that we do care about them, that their safety is a priority for us, they believe that there's more that can be done so that they start to feel that way and see those important scores start to rise up and how they see their employers care about them. And I think the two stats on the right here help reinforce some ways that we can help think about that. 2 and 5 say they believe safety training should be mandatory and regular. So how do we help make sure that that is happening, that people are attending, and that they're readily aware of everything that's available to them? And then the far right stat is really focusing on that transparency piece. 40% would feel unsafe if their employer didn't notify them about a safety incident. And I think what's interesting about that is that they'd feel unsafe if you didn't say anything. So it really would be almost inviting people to feel less secure in their organization if their employer was not being transparent. And they're really looking for that information to come through in a credible way. But Peter, I'll pass this over to you for some thoughts on these training and communication stats.
Yeah, I think the way you can use this information that you just shared is pretty simple. Just take the suggestions from employees that Matt just shared with us. Pretty straightforward. If you aren't already doing them now, start now. And again, there are, the top 3 that you have out there are to improve communication surrounding safety, be more transparent, and provide more or better, I think it's really better, safety training. It's a great starting point for improving your company-wide safety culture and making your employees feel seen, heard, and protected. As Matt shared in the data he presented, employees really want to be prepared for emergencies at work. They need a very clear understanding of how to stay safe while working. And they actually feel safer and more prepared when they're directly involved in their company's safety decisions and their overall programs that they put together. I also suggest reviewing the cadence and the structure of your drills and exercises. Some of the industry experts that I've spoken with on the Employee Safety Podcast suggest using a combination of tabletop exercises, online trainings, and in-person drills. Using shorter, more bite-sized training has been seen to be very effective as well. A lot of organizations use third parties or consulting companies to facilitate these exercises, which can really help to offer an outside perspective. Sometimes that's just much better than hearing it from the same person over and over. We also suggest you involve emergency services like your local police department, EMS, the fire department. Your meet and greet with these folks shouldn't be for the first time during an actual emergency. That's super important. You can also use this information to really empower your employees to take an active role in their own safety, because ultimately it's up to them. So definitely solicit their feedback, like I mentioned before. Ask for suggestions on training or exercises. If they don't like what you're doing, the only way you can get better is by asking them, well, what's wrong with it? And based on what they give you, you can work with that. So find out what's working for them and what's not in terms of preparedness. You can even do things like rewarding your employees for being the first to respond to an emergency notification test message or something around emergency preparedness, or provide other incentives just for engaging. It's just little things like that which can really add up and make a huge difference overall in their safety. And then just ultimately remember, safety is everyone's job. It's not just the person wearing the vest or that has the title. Everybody has to be involved in it. All right, so I know we're going to take some final audience questions here in a moment, but let's just quickly look at this summary that you're seeing on the screen here, summary of just some of the key takeaways to wrap up. So first, show employees that you prioritize their safety and their well-being above all else. Frankly, if people aren't safe, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they don't feel safe, they can't focus on anything else, and they can't be productive for the company. So make sure that you really focus on that. Second, protect all workers by monitoring and communicating about the evolving threat landscape around them for any kind of incident. Next thing you want to do is equip your business travelers with situational awareness and very clear communication pathways. Remember that stat where people are like, I don't even know who to call if I run into trouble on a trip. And then also include and prioritize mental health in your safety culture. It's super important. And then lastly, just be more transparent with communication before, during, and after any kind of incident, and then offer better safety training, not more of it, just better. Think in terms of like bite-sized training that people can consume and remember, as opposed to really long 2-3 hour sessions where they kind of their eyes glaze over. So those are the key takeaways. Katie, back to you.
Excellent. Well, this is your final opportunity to ask questions or submit comments. And we've gotten a few questions asking if we're getting folks' questions. We definitely are, but there are a ton coming in. So we're just trying to prioritize them as best we can. But this one, I think, is a good one to ask because I bet a lot of folks are curious about this. So I think, Peter, I'm going to send this one to you, but Matt, feel free to weigh in as well. So this person says, safety and emergency preparedness doesn't always rise to a high interest level for most people, understandably. So what suggestions do you have to increase interest and awareness in this? Any thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for another 30 minutes if you want. But I would say to start, you always have to start with the why. You know, it's that book from Simon Sinek. It's start with the why, that this is so important. And then number two, you've got to make it about them. It's got to be highly relatable. If they don't understand why this is important and then how it directly relates to them, then everyone's eyes are going to glaze over. And then the third thing, I think it's really important, it's got to be in the culture. It's got to come from the top. Like if people see that in addition to showing up at work and doing my job, part of doing my job is being safe and thinking about safety, then that's just part of what they do and who they are at work. And if you're not doing that, if it's not infused in your culture, then yeah, people are going to be like, oh, this is just something I do like once a quarter or once a year, as opposed to something I just exist in throughout my job at work, day in and day out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Matt, I'm going to direct this one to you. Someone said kind of early on in the presentation, you said that 75% of employees say that their employer's safety efforts have not been very effective, but how do the employees know that? So can you clarify like exactly like what we were asking? Like, is this just about the employees' perceptions within themselves, or was there more nuance to what was asked?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. This is all perceptual. So it's how does the employee believe their organization is effective or not at safety efforts? And I think one stat that we thought was interesting is that even if it is a personal perception of what that is, individuals who think that their organizations are effective with the safety efforts are less likely to be worried about workplace violence, about public health emergencies, about crime. And so even if it is a personal relation that person has with the effectiveness measure, it is important because it does impact how they feel about their organization and their level of safety when they're at work itself.
Gotcha. And I'm going to stick with you here, Matt. And this one's kind of specific, but interesting. So no worries if you don't have the exact answer, but do you find that employees in public facing jobs have more concerns about safety than others?
It's a great question. I unfortunately don't have the data on hand, but again, that should be something in the report itself. But there are more details, certainly around different job types that we saw around different levels, people of newer to more experienced in the workforce. And so we do see a lot of variations occur in those places. My assumption would be that people who are more public facing probably do have more concerns around safety itself if they are out in public more actively. And I tie that mainly to some of the thoughts around commuting and general concerns that we saw from that aspect of it. It really is part of that travel being out of a secure, confined location that we saw some spikes in people's concern when it comes to safety elements.
Excellent answer. Thank you. And I do want to tell everyone how they can download the full report and where to find it, but I do want to go ahead and launch our first poll, or our last poll, excuse me. And this one will be really, really quick. So if we could go ahead and launch that now, that would be fantastic. All right. So you heard from Peter, who's our communication expert, but AlertMedia has just a number of very experienced, very qualified experts in a number of different categories: business continuity, security, crisis management. I could go on and on. So just take a moment to let us know if you want to hear more about that. You can say yes, and we will get you all the info that you need. And you can say no, not at this time, and no hard feelings. We'll be there if you ever need us. So we'll just give another minute for folks to get their answers in there. And then I think we can go ahead and close out that poll, and I'm going to get to the report. All right, so you're going to want to go to alertmedia.com and download the 2023 State of Employee Safety Report, or you can use this handy dandy QR code that you see here on your screen. But actually, a perk of being a webinar attendee today is that you're going to all receive it in your inbox. So we'll be emailing that all out to you shortly, so be on the lookout for that. It is just chock full of amazing information, and a lot of the questions that you guys asked that we weren't able to get to today are in that full report. So I did just want to make sure I took a moment to say that, because all of you were so great today with your questions. I do want to go ahead and thank our speakers. So Matt and Peter, thank you so much for being here with us today. And if you guys want to be in touch with either of our speakers or ask another question, their email addresses are here for you on the screen. So Matt, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us.
It was great to be here today. Thank you.
And Peter, it's always a pleasure working with you on webinars and all other things. So thank you for your insights and time as well.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'll just remind everyone that get your best anecdotal stories of safety issues to tug at your executives' heartstrings so they'll open their ears and start listening to you, but then use this empirical evidence to tug at the purse strings, because that's what's going to make them want to invest in safety.
It's such a great point, Peter. Thank you. All right. Well, that wraps up what we have for you guys today, but we really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. We would love to see you on a future AlertMedia webinar. And of course, I want to take this time to thank Security Magazine. You guys are such a great partner. Thank you for having us today.